Verse 68, the famous verse 68. And the Lord shall bring thee into Egypt again with ships. By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again. And there ye shall be sold unto your enemies for bondmen and bondwomen, and no man shall buy you. Pause. Now, please note that we have shown that every other instance in this chapter where the word Egypt appears, it's literally referring to Egypt, the geographical place of Egypt that the Israelites departed from. And the black Hebrews will even lie and tell you that the word Egypt means bondage. In Hebrew, it doesn't mean bondage. I don't know what language are they talking about. And black Hebrew Israelites will also tell you, why would they have to go to Egypt on ships when they could just walk there? Well, for some reason, I don't think these black Hebrews ever bothered to look at a map. Friends, what is the quickest way to make it from Egypt to Israel? Obviously through the Mediterranean, which especially at the time could only really be reached with over 100,000 slaves securely by ship through the Nile that cuts through Egypt. As a matter of fact, historians teach us that the main reason that Rome had such a huge navy was to transport slaves. Actually, they also teach that 25% of the whole Roman Empire were actually slaves, and not specifically black ones, because for some reason these black Hebrew Israelites think that every slave that ever existed in human history was black. And also at the time of the Roman Empire, the Egyptian slave markets were in Alexandria, near the Mediterranean. But, you know, friends, you don't have to take my word for it. Munter, the famous Roman historian, writes, now that Beitar had been captured, everything came under human control, while Palestinian Judah was reduced to a desolate mound. Captives were sold into slavery in numbers too great to count, for they were brought to the grand annual market at the terebinth Elo tree in Hebron, or in other words, Hieronymus, to the tent Ohel of Abraham near Hebron. Each slave sold for the price of a horse. Those captives who were not sold there were brought to the marketplace in Gaza, which, because of the great multitude of slaves who were sold there, it was called Hadrian's marketplace. And those who were still not sold there were herded into ships and were taken to Egypt. Many died in transit, whether by starvation or by shipwreck, while many also were killed by cruel masters. This is a Roman historian, my friends. I'm not making this up. But regardless, we have more. It states in another source, innumerable was the multitude of those who were sold away as slaves at the annual market at Terebinth of Hebron. They were offered for sale in such numbers that a Jewish slave was no more valuable than a horse. What could not be disposed of there was brought to Gaza, and there sold or sent to Egypt, on the way which many died of hunger or of shipwreck. Clear enough, my friends? And a part of what we know of the Roman occupation and the later destruction of the Second Temple, which clearly explains this curse, it's also common sense that this being told to the Israelites after they were taken out of Egypt through water, through the Red Sea, or literally the Sea of Reeds, common sense would also tell us that being that the average Egyptian slave didn't have a map, they would only understand that they would return to Egypt through water also, because that's how they came out. This is actually common sense, because they did wander 40 years in the desert, not really knowing where they were going, right? It sounds plausible. Well, what if I told you that that is just what they believed before the destruction of the temple by the Romans? In the Aramaic translation of the Torah, known as the Targum Yonasan ben Uziel, now, this was written at the time of Jesus, and it paraphrases the above verse as saying, and Hashem will exile you back to Egypt in ships by the way of the Reed Sea that you once crossed, and concerning which I said, you shall not see it again, and there you will be sold into servitude to your enemies for large sums of money as craftsmen, and afterwards you will be sold cheaply as slaves and maidservants until you will be cheapened and try to sell yourselves for nothing, and no one will take you in. Deuteronomy 28:68. Interesting, huh? And according to black Hebrew Israelite theology, this translation was made by a black Hebrew. And another source teaches that after the fall of the Second Temple, Josephus writes, because the soldiers were now growing weary of bloodshed and survivors appeared constantly, Caesar orders to kill only those who offered armed resistance and to take alive all the rest. The troops, in addition to those covered by their orders, slaughtered the aged and infirmed, people to their pride who might be useful. They herded them into the temple area and shut them in the court of the women. Caesar appointed one of his freedmen as their guard, his friend Fronto, to decide the fate appropriate for each. All those who had taken part in sedition and brigandage they formed against each other, he executed. He picked out the tallest and handsomest of the lot and reserved them for the triumph. Of the rest, those who were over 17, he put in chains and sent to hard labor in Egypt, while great numbers were presented by Titus to the provinces to perish in the theaters by sword or wild beasts. Those under 17 were sold. Now this was written by Josephus, who they also claim was a black Hebrew. And to finish with this verse, it states, "By the way whereof I spake unto thee, thou shalt see it no more again." Now friends, what does this mean? Here, the archaic English poses a problem for those who don't know Hebrew. In other words, it reads, "From when I told you that you shall not return to that place again." Where do we have a commandment, my friends, that the Almighty told us that we should not return to Egypt again? Deuteronomy 17:16. "For the Lord has told you, you are not to go back that way again." Obviously talking about the geographical Egypt and not America. Case closed.